students with special needs, why are students entitled to due process before receiving discipline? Because education is a right. We guarantee under the 14th Amendment that students will be educated. And one of the big differences, or one of the big things that are hard for parents to accept and students to accept, is that although education is a right, prom night, walking at graduation, those are not rights. Those are privileges. So you're not entitled to a due process hearing if the discipline is that you can't go to prom or you can't walk at graduation. However, if you are being suspended for more than 10 days, and I'm going to go into that ad nauseum probably, or if you're expelled or they're seeking to expel you, then you are entitled to due process. You have a right to an education. It's a property right, and it can also implicate liberty rights, students' good name or reputation if you're denied your education. So the elements of due process for all student discipline matters is a notice, fair hearing, and opportunity to be heard.
And that's not the due process we were talking about before.
Right. This is totally different due process. And although I think due process might be a misnomer, which I'll probably get on my soapbox and talk about, it is still considered due process. And so you have a notice that you're going to have a hearing, that the school is seeking to either long-term suspend your child or expel them. You would then have a fair hearing, or what they call a fair hearing. I have a little problem with the fair part, and an opportunity to be heard. So first we have to talk about the difference between suspension and expulsion. Suspension, suspension means temporary. So the child is taken out of the school or out of their curriculum for a specified period of time, and they're not able to go to school. And there's a short term, which means 10 days or less, and there's long term, which is 11 days or more. But it's still supposed to be temporary, so at some point the child can return. Where expulsion is the permanent withdrawal or taking the student out of attending school. And the only way that gets changed is if the governing board reinstates a student. So in Arizona, a student can be expelled for continued open defiance of authority, continued disruptive or disorderly behavior, violent behavior that includes use or display of dangerous instrument or a deadly weapon, use of a gun or a knife, although it has to be at a certain definition. Students over the age of 16 who have completed the course of study through 10th grade can be expelled for excessive absenteeism. I have a little bit of a problem with suspending or expelling students because they're absent or truant, because pretty much they're getting what they want, and it's not going to solve the problem. So I'm a big proponent of no suspension or expulsion, especially for excessive absenteeism. The law also allows school districts to expel students for actions other than those listed in the statutes as the school district deems appropriate. There's usually a handbook, and it tells you what the offense is and what the proposed violations are, minimum and maximum. In Arizona, at least, and I think there are other school districts as well as charter schools, they can refuse to admit a pupil who has been expelled from another educational institution who is in the process or is in the process of. So, in other words, if you get that little notice that says we're going to expel your child or even long-term suspend them, and they think, I'll just leave, I'll withdraw my kid and I'll go over to another school, on the application to open enroll at another school, it's going to say, are you or have you ever been or are you presently undergoing a suspension or seeking for expulsion. So you may not be able to do that. So you might want to try to work that out. I don't think we'll have time, but if I do, I will discuss how you can sometimes make an agreement. is out of school suspension of a student with emotional disturbance who is acting out and physically aggressive a violation of FAPE? If it is more than 10 days, it is, and if they have an IEP. Need both of those. If they have an emotional disturbance but they haven't got the IEP in place, no, you're not entitled to FAPE. If you have a 504, only a 504, you may not be entitled to it, and I'll be talking about that. There are exceptions if they allow regular ed students to receive an education while during the suspension, then so would the student with the 504. But if the student has an IEP and it's more than 10 days, they still get FAPE, and I'm going to be going into that. But if it's less than 10 days, it's called 10 free FAPE days. Well, I don't know if it's called that, but I call it that.
FAPE free,
so,
free FAPE.
10 free, oh, there we go, it's up on the screen. 10 free FAPE days. So, if a student is, whether they have an IEP, a 504, or a regular ed student, when we get the calls, my child was suspended for 8 days or even 10 days. The first question is that for the whole school year? Or is that, that's an entirety, or was it 8 days now and 4 days another time? The reason we ask that is from the beginning of the school year to the end of the school year, one school year, so typically August to May. I know some districts and some states different, but typically one school year, you look to see how many days somebody has suspended in its entirety. So if it's 3 days here, 4 days there, 7 days there, and it comes out to more than 10 days, it's no longer FAPE, and if you have an IEP or 504, you're entitled to due process. But you also have to ask what the reason for the suspensions were. In other words, if one's for fighting and another one is for absenteeism and another one is for bringing alcohol to school, they're not really related. The 10 days don't necessarily go together. However, we always argue that they should. They should all be counted together. And I know not all districts agree, but we know some of the attorneys for the districts say they err on the side of caution as well, and that they do the totality. And if it's 10 days for whatever reasons, they'll usually recommend that the due process gets put into place. The hearing gets made as a manifestation determination. But once again, and I know I keep saying this, but if it's less than 10 days in totality, there's not much we can do. So we ask those questions. If the parent says, no, this is their first suspension and it's 10 days long, then I ask, are they looking to long-term suspend? Have you gotten a notice? No, they said he could come back after 10 days. Unfortunately, there's not much we can do for you, and I'm not going to waste your time or money, tell you to take the punishment and not to get in trouble again, at least not for this school year.
But to call an IEP meeting.
Yeah, if the child is special ed, you ask for an IEP meeting because you do want to go over why this happened to hopefully prevent it from happening again. So, discipline of the IEP student. The 10 free days, nothing we can do. 10 days is 10 days. Anything beyond that, though, you have a manifestation determination hearing. There are exceptions to that, but I'll talk about that after. But in general, always think if the child is being suspended for more than 10 days, there should be a manifestation determination review. It's another acronym, MDR. And I'll talk about how those hearings work in a minute. And then there may be a change in placement because if the child is not receiving services, they're out of school. And when I say suspension, I just want to clarify, suspension could be an in-school suspension. And we still consider that a suspension, and we consider that as a day, or even part of a day we consider as a whole day. So if a child gets sent to a principal's office, that's considered being out of class, not receiving FAPE. So that would be counted as towards one of the 10 days. So then we look to see if there's going to be a change in placement, if they're not going to be getting services, if they're not going to be getting educated.